bit about the process of memoing. So I have a very specific way that I memo because it works for me and that I organize the information so that I can see trends across my interviews with different participants. So I always label it with the participant number. And in this case, I had a couple of different descriptors because I was interviewing K-12 teachers, adults with autism, adults with dyslexia, and adults with selective mutism. So I also put what that descriptor would be that I would be utilizing in there. And then I put kind of like with something if it's a unique interview. So this interview was extremely unique in that the person that I was interviewing had several overwhelmingly emotional moments when talking about their experience being on the spectrum. So I did label this with emotional engagement so that when I was coming back, I could find who that was. So currently I have 14 participants, and juggling and remembering them all in my write-up is difficult. So I kind of tagged it with this so that I could find it a bit easier. I keep a Word document of my memo, and I also keep a memo in Deduce, which we'll talk about in a minute. So when I'm actually memoing, I like to give some context, and so that context includes things like what was happening in the interview. This was at her lunch break. It was in her car, so it was hard to kind of see a lot of body movement because she was in her car. And then just at a very high level, what was the interview like? So you'll see, I say she has high levels of self-awareness. She's very articulate. But she did struggle with like retrieving her words at times, and she did show emotional distress. So think of the context as kind of a summary. It's a very high level summary. I'm not talking about their answers. I'm talking more about the overall, from a high level, what did the interview look like so it can jog my memory later. Then the observations are going to be those key things that, not their answers, but the things that I noticed while they were giving their answers. And I use shorthand in a notebook to write this up. So this participant, she was very engaged and aware in the interview. She never deviated away from it. But she did have a lot of clear emotional strain during some of the parts of the interview. Her body language showed anxiety, and so I talk a lot about body language in these, and I've got, again, I just shorthand it as I'm taking notes during an interview. She had like raised shoulders when I would ask questions like, what was your K-12 experience like? She teared up a couple of times when talking about her home life in K-12. And this kind of led me to give some follow-up prompts to get more concrete examples while still allowing her comfort and clarity. So I would shift away from what was difficult for her, and I would try to give an example of something to kind of move her out of that space. And then despite those challenges, she really had this profound degree of self-awareness. Like, she knew that tone, and you'll see I bolded that. She was very aware that she doesn't understand the tone of people, and that she can send a reply back with the wrong tone a lot. So she uses tools to really work with that. And so because she was so self-aware, again, it's not about what she said. It's about me looking at the overall interview and saying, wow, she really was hyper aware of this deficit. And that's not something that I saw in all of my interviews. Whenever I would ask questions about AI, she really had this mix of like relief for her when she would talk about it, because she would talk about what was really difficult for her before, and then how she found a tool that made it really helpful. So whenever I would ask her specific questions about her usage, she really just seemed like relieved about the situation when talking about the pre versus post. And she really was able to talk about her challenges in a very clear way that we didn't see in the other interviews. And she really kept coming back to this idea of like work and how it helps her break things down. So even though she had a lot of emotional distress, even when asked a question that wasn't directly about executive functioning, she would kind of come back to it each time. And so again, it's not what she said, it's the trend that I noticed when I would ask a question. Even if the question was related to anxiety, it would tie into the fact that she's anxious because she can't break tasks into smaller components. and then it would circle back to that. So that's a really important theme that I'm going to use in my results. Then I just kind of gave some bullet points. So key themes that she had was that she uses it extensively for communication, for understanding tone, and these are tied into my research questions. Her executive functioning support, she talked about that. So it's just a quick summary. These are two of my research questions that she most deeply connected with in the interview. And then again, another trend, and this isn't necessarily related to my research question, but it's something that when I'm coding her interview, I really expect to see this emerge as a theme, is that she shared some really painful examples and some trauma related to K-12 education and her family's responses to that trauma. And so that became a bullet point because as I code that data, I want to keep in mind that at a high level that those moments were very emotionally charged for her, so that when I come back to do my analysis later down the road, I still have this to make sure that I remember that what was said and what was coded was in this emotionally charged state. Then in the future AI section, she really talked about a sense of hope because it's already made such a difference in her life that she felt like if AI continues, that it's going to make her fit better into society, and it's going to really help her support her neurodivergent needs. And she also really articulated that it's a tool. And the last sentence of my memo was very related to what we're seeing in some of the teacher interviews. Teachers are so concerned that it's going to replace, but she uses it as a tool. So she'll write a message and she'll check the tone. She'll get a text message and put it in and check the tone and then write the message. So she's not actively engaging with utilizing it to replace something, but instead she's using it as a tool. Then my reflexive notes are always about me as the interviewer. So for me as the interviewer, it really made me pull on my emotional intensity and trauma response knowledge and being able to navigate this interview. And so I said, it was really necessary to be sensitive, to be patient. I gave a lot of pauses and a lot of places for her. And I also adapted some of the questions as she found it difficult to answer due to her trauma. I also just said, from my perspective, her openness was really invaluable. I really think this was, and I say this every time I do an interview and I do a memo, but I really felt like this was it's going to be a very important piece of the study because she really gave so much rich information and she really nailed my research questions. Like I got so much information on the different research questions and she talked with the openness. And so her ability to articulate all of that was just a really powerful reminder to me of how much invisible work there is for neurodivergent people to fit into the world. And so this is always me and how I responded, what I thought. Sometimes I have really difficult interviews because I don't agree with participants. And that then becomes a reflexive note that I take to myself and say, this was a really hard interview for me. I have a hard time being unbiased about this, and I need to come back to this and remember that moment. So the reflexive notes are really just my perspective. And this is where, I can make some leaps of interpretation and just kind of note that, maybe there is this and that, or maybe there is something else. And so that's kind of what the reflexive section is. So that's how I memo, and I keep a copy in Word and I keep a copy in Deduce. And I'm going to have another video that shows you how to do this in Deduce. But I wanted to have a walkthrough of what is a memo, and why is it important, which is really just that as I code the person and then I do my other participants, there's this big gap in time where it's really easy to forget what happened in the interview and what these nuances were, remembering that she was stressed and that her shoulders were up and those types of things. I might not remember that if I don't record it. So the memo is really meant to take you back, and it's also meant to support your findings. Ideally, what you're memoing, you should be seeing in your coding, which is why we typically memo straight after the interview, and then you might code later, but you really want that memo to happen pretty quickly.